Hey, what's up? It's your boy Rawk. I hate quality. I want things to be actively worse, thank you very much. When possible, I want to play my games in the most simple form I can. This is the life.
Worse graphics, more limited controls, full price, and actively worse. That's how I want my games, if that's quite alright with you.
Who am I? The Nintendo Switch?
The Demaster, an interesting little topic in gaming, defined as taking a game made for one piece of hardware and getting it to run on pencil lead. A lot of Demasters are fan-made and are the physical embodiment of fans of certain games or series daring to ask what if. But they're not what I'm interested in talking about today. They're undoubtedly cool, don't get me wrong, but what happens when a big shot company like Nintendo takes one of their many beloved titles and puts it on hardware that has absolutely no business running it? Donkey Kong Country on Game Boy.
All good stories start with Donkey Kong on the Game Boy, and they end in genocide.
A lot of Nintendo's Demasters take residence on their handhelds because, dear God, nobody else would take them. And one of the first true instances of this was the Donkey Kong Land series on Game Boy. Now, technically, I am cheating by counting these games, but on the plus side, so did my wife.
So we'll call it even.
The Donkey Kong Land games are a series of half remakes, half original games, essentially seeing Donkey Kong Country from the Super Nintendo squished onto a pomegranate. Is there a helpline for this kind of stuff? Donkey Kong Land, released in 1995, sees the assets and engine of Donkey Kong Country being retooled to work on this playable slab of meat. But to its credit, it does feature unique level designs, so it's not a complete cash grab. It does do a lot to at least try and set itself apart. But to take that credit right back, this game is awful! Sure, for a Game Boy take on Donkey Kong Country, it does the job, and it clearly did relatively well because it got 2 sequels, each ripping assets and mechanics from Donkey Kong Country's 2 sequels.
Because every good story also has incest.
But outside of the novelty of simply having Donkey Kong Country on the Game Boy, this is worthless. And that's saying a lot when Loops is on the same system. But hold your horses there, we're not done with Donkey Kong Country on Game Boy, because Rare developed another demaster of the original game for the Game Boy Color in 2000. What? Was Donkey Kong Land not enough? Did we just need more portable monkeys? Sticking with Donkey Kong Country for the time being, we also have Donkey Kong Country. Is there a Donkey Kong continent? Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3 were demastered again for the Game Boy Advance in 2003. That's 3 fucking demasters of the same game in the span of 8 years. Obviously, there was merit to re-releasing these games on the GBA. The Donkey Kong Land games did have some speck of originality, so it wasn't entirely fair to say if you've played those games, you've played Donkey Kong Country on the go! And the Game Boy Color demaster was just the original Donkey Kong Country, so fine, I get it. And hell, these versions were the closest thing to playing this trilogy on the go besides taking the Super Nintendo in the car with you. The Game Boy Advance was very similar to that system in terms of power, so there aren't really too many compromises with these versions. That doesn't mean there's none! The colours are a lot more washed out here compared to the SNES versions. That's obviously because you had to set the original GBA model on fire to be able to see the screen, so dialing up the brightness and contrast makes sense. But it still looks pretty freaky. But hey, I can at the very least understand why these demasters were made. They finally, properly satisfied the lust for an ape on the bus. I still think Nintendo and Rareware have been fucking a bit too much. The GBA was a breeding ground for this sort of stuff. Essentially being a portable Super Nintendo made it a porting powerhouse. But there were naturally a good amount of sacrifices that came with playing games on this system. Is it fair to say that the Super Mario Advanced games are just a series of demasters?
Of course it is! Just like it's fair to say that I'm not gonna get shot. I stand by it.
Hear me out. The Super Mario Advance series consists of portable versions of Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, and Super Mario Bros. 3. Mario 2 and 3 are based on their Super Mario All-Stars releases, meaning that each and every one of these are Super Nintendo games. Therefore, Demasters. Now, does the fact that these games have enhanced sound design, such as the addition of Mario and the Gang's voices, the fact that they all have extra content in the form of new levels and cutscenes, and the fact that Super Mario Advance 4 Super Mario Bros. 3 features unlockable bonus content through the use of the Game Boy Advance e-reader, which includes levels that infuse elements from every single one of the Advance games, make my point completely invalid? Absolutely it does. So I'm going to kindly ask you to shut the f*** up. Now here's a funky one, Super Mario 64 DS, a full-on remake of Super Mario 64. This version is better than the original in a lot of ways. They spruced up the graphics, they added 3 more playable characters, and 30 more stars, which is a pretty sizable amount of new content. This to me makes DS the definitive version of Super Mario 64, which is a sentiment that nobody agrees with. The controls in this version are absolutely wretched, purely because it was designed for the Nintendo DS. You know, the Nintendo DS, that system with no control sticks. Playing a 3D platformer with a D-pad is something that even God didn't anticipate. It's far from great, but it honestly isn't enough for me to personally consider it a D-Master. But God also didn't anticipate how much it would hurt to control this game with the touchscreen.
Oh God! It's a D-Master! It's a D-Master, alright?
But if there's one Nintendo system that has more D-Masters than any other without question, it would not be the Wii, but I swear it has a great personality. Now, were there any Nintendo supplied D-Masters on the Wii? How could they make a D-Master for their most powerful system at the time? Were there any D-Masters supplied by the third parties? What do you think? The Wii was the best-selling console of the 7th generation by an absolute landslide, but it was also significantly less powerful than the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. So on the one hand, every developer under the sun wanted their games on the Wii because the Wii had a user base of 100 million people who loved games like Wii Sports. We put Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on here, we win. But on the other hand, there was some major sacrifices that had to be made to get HD games to even think about working on this system. So, in came the Nintendo Wii D-Master, taking games from the other systems and slicing and dicing them just enough for them to work on the Wii. Sega did this quite a bit. They released Sonic and All-Stars Racing and Sega Superstars Tennis on the Wii, and they were pretty damn similar to their HD counterparts, minus online play. But they also released Sonic Unleashed, which was notable for not being Sonic Unleashed. The Wii version of this game is completely different compared to the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions. Not only does it have a massive graphical downgrade, but the levels and gameplay are also completely different here. A lot of levels and segments from this game are straight up cut from the Wii version, and the ones that remained rarely retained the original level design. This is really neat because it makes this game stand out a lot from the HD version, and in some ways could be argued to be the better of the two. But necessary, this was not. I don't know. I feel like if they really tried, they could have gotten original flavor Sonic Unleashed running on the Wii. I don't think the levels and gameplay were impossible to get working here. Now the PS2, that's tricky. Call of Duty got similar treatment to Sonic Unleashed, where most of the games out at the time of the series hitting it big received cheese-grated Wii versions that utilized motion controls and were ass ugly. These were far from the definitive way to play these games, but the motion controls did offer a unique incentive to buy these games on Wii compared to the platforms that could actually handle them.
Oh, I don't need an incentive. I need a cure.
But potentially the best Wii D-Master is Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop. Dead Rising was an Xbox 360 game about surviving in a zombie-infested mall using any form of concrete matter you can get your grubby Dead Rising playing hands on. The game's sequels would end up making their way to the PlayStation 3, but the Wii was the only non-Xbox platform to get the original Dead Rising.
Point 1 for Nintendo fans.
Now obviously, the Wii was not cut out to handle Dead Rising. With there being hundreds of zombies on screen all at once, the Wii version can only handle about 10 to 20, or at least it feels that way. But the most bizarre thing about this D-Master is that it reuses the engine and some gameplay elements from Resident Evil 4. Capcom developed both of these games, and both due to how successful Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition was, and how little time they were actually given to make Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop, they ended up just reusing as much as they possibly could from RE4, and the result is fucking weird. If developers are naming games after their development cycles, why wasn't Sonic Forces called Sonic We Give Up? This is potentially the strangest Demaster I've ever seen. It has absolutely no reason to exist, and the fact that they reused assets from a game in a completely different series? Name me a more funky Demaster, I dare you.
You couldn't just let me be happy? Not even for a minute?
The Nintendo 3DS. This system was the undisputed king of the Demaster. That's not how you want to be remembered in the history books. I'm just putting it out there, this is beginning to be a bit much. The strangest example to me on this console is the Luigi's Mansion remake, taking the original GameCube classic and trying to cram it into the engine and style of Luigi's Mansion 2. By all accounts, this is a good remake. The graphics have been updated to be closer to the sequel, there's some new content here and there, but if you'll pardon my French, this game does not run well. The 3DS chokes on this game. I'm not gonna king shame, but I'd really rather it didn't. Especially on the original model, it runs so poorly. It's not unplayable or anything, it functions, but the performance here is so much worse than the original, which ran absolutely flawlessly. Also, I feel that a lot of the charm of the original game is lost when you try and make it fit into Darkmoon's graphical style. Sure, both styles are very recognizable as Luigi's Mansion, but 2 and the 3DS remake are clearly very different than the original in terms of their overall presentation. So while this remake is definitely good, it's not the definitive way of playing this game in my opinion. Therefore, I'm considering this a Demaster. But Luigi's Mansion was developed as a full-fledged remake in the same vein as Super Mario 64 DS. If we want something closer to Donkey Kong Country on the GBA, we could always look at Donkey Kong Country on the 3DS.
God, this fucking monkey just won't stop!
Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D. If the 3DS struggles to run a GameCube game, then how the does it manage to run a game from the next generation? Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D is what happens when game developers discover the Gaussian blur effect. This version is so fuzzy compared to the Wii version, and the frame rate is cut in half. But if you hold it back and squint a bit, it looks about as good as the Wii version in motion. Speaking of motion, this game lacks it. The motion controls from the Wii version are completely gone here, being replaced entirely with button controls. Does this make Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D the definitive way of playing this game?
I'm gonna say yes, purely on the basis of this game making a damn inspiring before and after ad.
This was me before Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D existed.
God, I love Donkey Kong, but I'm gonna need surgery after playing this game.
And this is me after Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D existed. The difference is astounding. In a similar vein, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. I didn't know you could take away graphical quality and frame rate and be more epic! That truly is the Epic Yarn way. This game is pretty much an exact rehash of the Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D situation, with the fun bonus of being even more pointless. This game released in March of 2019, 3 full years after the Nintendo Switch had released. The only people playing the 3DS by then were people who had a point to make.
You don't need a Nintendo Switch! The 3DS has Luigi's Mansion and Donkey Kong, and there's a shitty Kirby game coming out soon. I'd like to see the Switch do that! I may need to rethink some things.
This game just baffles me. If you had to port a Kirby game from the Wii, why wouldn't you just port Kirby's Return to Dreamland? You already had Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot on this system. It would have been so much easier to get that game working on the 3DS compared to Epic Yarn. But no, it's more fun to be stupid. So Return to Dreamland will not be put on the 3DS. Kirby's Epic Yarn will! To the Nintendo Switch.
Oh, son of a bitch!
What about a Wii game that satiates both lusts? One that came to both the 3DS and the Nintendo Switch. Xenoblade Chronicles. This game would release as Xenoblade Chronicles 3D exclusively on the new 3DS in 2015, and would actually feature content that the Nintendo Switch version that released in 2020 didn't. So, crossbreeding is in now. Remember this. But you want to know what's more fun and stupid than this? Wii U games on the 3DS. This is a waking nightmare.
It can't run a fucking GameCube game!
The 3DS got so many Wii U Demasters that it scares me. Now, I could count Super Smash Bros. For 3DS, but A, this version came out before the Wii U version, and B, this one is better than the Wii U version, so if anything, Smash Wii U is the Demaster of the two. Whenever people ask if they should start with the good news or the bad news, you should always start with the bad news. So even if the good news is mediocre, at least things won't be getting worse for you. And with that in mind, Super Mario Maker for the Nintendo 3DS. Ha! What's the point of this existing? This version of Mario Maker is severely downgraded compared to the Wii U original. It still has the same fundamental gameplay with the same level creator and all of the same tools available, but that's also all it has! This version of Mario Maker doesn't allow you to upload and share levels online, meaning you also can't play other people's levels. You know, the whole point of Mario Maker? Why would you include that in a Mario Maker game? To be fair, this version does have about 100 pre-made levels from Nintendo. But so does Mario Maker 2, and you don't see me bragging about it. Also, Super Mario Maker features New Super Mario Bros. U as a game style, so when transitioning this game over to the 3DS, Nintendo decided to not use the assets of the New Super Mario Bros. Game that's already on this platform, but instead decided to put Mario U in a blender. This is fucking pathetic. It's so stupid looking. Nintendo, nobody's impressed by this. Just take the easy way out next time. Kinda makes me surprised they never outright demastered New Super Mario Bros. U for the 3DS.
Oh, don't tempt them.
Next up, Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World. Oh man, they got Poochie in this game? I'll buy 5 copies just because of that. This demastered version of Yoshi's Woolly World actually doesn't seem all that bad. They reworked the graphics a fair bit to make them work on the 3DS, so compared to other 3DS demasters we've seen so far, it doesn't just look like a console game without your glasses on. It looks more like something I still don't want to play. Remember how Xenoblade Chronicles was a crossbreeder? It started a revolution! Captain Toad Treasure Tracker and Hyrule Warriors both received demasters on the 3DS and ports to the Switch. What the fuck's going on here? To be fair to Hyrule Warriors, the 3DS Demaster did release first. That doesn't excuse the piss poor performance, but it does excuse it from public execution. This version was just as worthless back then as it is nowadays, but I can at the very least kind of understand it. I mean, I can't imagine the Wii U version did particularly well because it was on the fucking Wii U, so bringing it to a more successful platform, it's justified. But Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, oh no! This game released on the 3DS on the same day as the Switch port. Nintendo, we get it, you're horny, but you're at a fucking funeral, man. You can tell this game wasn't made for the 3DS. Admittedly, the style and gameplay here actually work incredibly well on the 3DS, maybe even better than they do on the Switch. But they had fuck all to put on the bottom screen, so they just duplicated the top screen.
That's a job well done.
This is the dictionary definition of unnecessary. But really, couldn't the same be said for all of these demasters? I mean, really, why would you play a demastered version of any particular game when the original, better version is sat there waiting to be purchased? Well, because having the option is a good thing. I don't want to play or even think about the 3DS version of Yoshi's Woolly World ever again, but if you only have a 3DS, then that's gonna be the only way for you to play it. Although I will say, so many of these things make no fucking sense. A lot of them strip out core mechanics or features in return for the novelty of playing them on a system that God didn't want you to play them on. And I think a lot of times, it's just not worth it, man.
Let that be a lesson to all of you non-virgins out there. If you want to avoid being burdened by Super Mario Maker on the 3DS, Practice safe sex.